All right, so the first question we have to ask the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. By the way, we're going to cut through a lot of complicated issues in this interview, and weave through it. And I want to give you your chance to describe a little bit of history and a little bit of what this outfit does. I think a lot of times the basics get lost in these interviews, and they need to be brought back to them. So first off, what do you think the mission of this agency is?
Well, Federal Housing, FHFA, is in charge of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and my view on it is that we are here to restore the American dream. You know, for the last 4 years under President Biden, there was a significant amount of inflation and nobody could afford a home. And so what we're really focused on is restoring the American dream of home ownership and making sure that people can actually afford to buy a home.
Right, and what are the biggest obstacles in the way of that right now?
Well, for the last 4 years, you've had rampant inflation, and you know what happens when you have inflation? You have mortgage rates that go up significantly, and we saw mortgage rates skyrocket. You know, under President Trump's first term, there was a ability to buy a home in this country. You know, people had good earnings, but they had low inflation, and they were able to buy a home. We're trying to restore that. We will restore it, and under President Trump's leadership, I'm very confident that Americans will be able to afford homes again.
This is something that affects everyone in America in a very intimate way, and a lot of times the relationship between, you know, that experience of being able to buy a home or not, the symbol of the American dream, is impacted by a bunch of causal factors behind the scenes that are very complicated and no one understands a lot about. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, one thing that might be a good way to start is, what's your understanding of the history of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac?
My understanding is that there was a lot of fraud and a lot of waste and abuse that went on in 2008, and as a result, the government had to take over Fannie and Freddie. And so what we're focused on is getting rid of the fraud, getting rid of the waste, getting rid of the abuse, to make sure that these entities are stronger than ever before. These companies, I don't know if you know this, not a lot of people have known this, but we're going to be talking about it, makes billions and billions of dollars a year worth of profits. And it's very important that we be good stewards of the money that Fannie and Freddie are making. And the fact that we had this massive crash in 2008 can never happen again. And so that's what we're very focused on, is making sure that that will never happen again.
So speak to the fraud, because you've made waves very quickly. You've angered a lot of people in the Congress already, and you've dealt with fraud from the get-go. So what does that look like?
Well, I don't know how much we've angered people as much as we are just saying, look, we want to get rid of fraud. We want to get rid of fraud, waste, and abuse. We actually put a tip line together, and I appreciate you bringing it up, a tip line where anybody can submit tips to us, fraud tips, and that way we can get rid of this mortgage fraud. Because to your point, if we can get rid of fraud, we can lower the cost. And I think there's way more mortgage fraud than we think. I think there's way more insurance fraud than we think. You know, people don't think about insurance fraud, but when you go and you commit mortgage fraud, many times you're committing insurance fraud as well. So I think we've barely cracked the surface, unfortunately, with the amount of mortgage fraud going on.
Give me more of a sense of that. I mean, what does this look like? What's the scope of it? I mean, how much money are we talking about?
Well, from mortgage insurers and from other executives that I've talked to in the industry, you know, there's all types of fraud. People lying on their mortgage applications, people saying that they're going to occupy residences when they're not going to occupy residences, people overstating their income, people saying that they're going to do one thing with the property, but really they're going to do something else with it. And these are all the things that, as a systemic regulator, we're very focused on, because we don't want people who can't afford to home or own a home, or people who are misrepresenting what they're doing, to be recklessly using multiple homes and you know, creating this problem that we had in 2008.
Right. Another issue that I think is fascinating. It really came up out of nowhere. It's not something I ever imagined, and a lot of Americans ever imagined would happen. Are the discriminatory policies that were put in place when it comes to housing in order to supposedly reverse discrimination. There was a large push among policymakers over the last 5-10 years to basically, under the guise of we're going to help out the poor, help some people over others.
Very well said. And I think that's where maybe some people have been angered, is that we've gotten rid of DEI. We've gotten rid of some of the race-based awards. I mean, people shouldn't, get something because they're white or because they're black or what have you. Everybody should be treated equally. And so we're really restoring justice, I believe, in these entities, and really focused on writing mortgages and getting mortgages to as many Americans as possible. And I'm very confident that under President Trump's leadership, we're going to be able to restore the American dream for as many Americans as possible.
Oh, I'm into that. So what does that look like when you get rid of DEI? Like, what does that mean practically within the agency?
Well, what they did was, in many of these places, in my opinion, was they came up with different names. And so they would call them mission, and they would call them OMWI, which is actually something that we comply with in terms of a law. But they would, use these names. And by the way, we follow all the laws, we'll follow all the statutes, but they would use names to try to hide, different efforts. And again, we don't want to do anything that's racist. We don't want to do anything that's discriminatory, whether it's to one race or another. And so we've just very firmly have said, look, everybody should be treated equally, and our policies need to do that. And so we terminated the DEI executives at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Now, what's fascinating about that is that, I don't think that the vast majority of Americans agree with what you just said. There are probably, certain cronies who do not. But you have made changes. You've gotten rid of people as
Absolutely.
well. And what was that about? What needed to be cleaned in terms of the house?
That's a great question. We've gotten rid of people not just for DEI, but also for fraudulent or misleading activity, or facilitating fraud in some cases. And again, we're trying to really come in there and say, look, these companies need to be world-class companies. And under President Trump's leadership, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will be great American icons once again. And I feel very confident that we can do that. But there can be no place for fraud. There can be no place for mortgage fraud. There can be no place for insurance fraud. And so I think, we're going to continue to make progress. But again, I'm very confident that we'll be able to reverse the last 4 years and get this thing headed in the right direction. I think we're on our way.
And so, put fraud aside, let's look to the future, on our way into the future. What does that look like, as chairman, Freddie Mae? I mean, you're talking about, there's big talk in the air about what happens next.
Yeah, we oversee about $9 trillion of mortgages between Fannie and Freddie. About over 70% of U.S. mortgages go through these two great companies. But I think the best news is, not to get back to it, but it's just the facts of the matter, is we have a president who is going to, in my view, get inflation under control, who is doing amazing things with tariffs, who's going to get this economy booming again, who's going to get people earning again. And these are all things that help the American dream. So it's not to say we have an easy job, we have a tough job, but if there's one person to be leading it, it's President Trump, and I'm very confident he's going to get this done.
So in terms of conservatorship, I mean, we're looking at something that is a large government company.
Well, a lot of people talk about privatization of these two entities and exiting conservatorship and whatnot. We're really focused right now on making sure that these companies are world-class, that these are great American icons once again. There's been so much bloat going on, and really focused right now on operational efficiencies. Now, everybody agrees, I think, that conservatorship shouldn't be forever. However, we need to be laser focused on making sure that if and when something were to be done, that mortgage rates didn't go up, and that nothing would jeopardize the safety and soundness of the market.
So clean house, make it efficient first, and that's a larger problem that will be dealt with in the future. We're
going to clean house, and we're going to make sure that we also keep house with the people who are really good. There are some really good people in these companies, and so we're elevating the people who are great, and we're saying thank you to the ones who maybe aren't needed anymore. And again, restoring these two great companies, Fannie and Freddie, to greatness once again.
Make them great again. I like it.
Make Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac great again. We'll do it.
So how did you end up here? I mean, when you think about the trajectory of your career, and the preparation that you've had to come in and clean house, it strikes me that you have experience outside of government that might be valuable.
Yes, I spent my time buying, building, and growing companies, going in, partnering with management, getting rid of maybe some people who were doing a bad job and promoting those who were doing a good job. And so I've done that, and I've made quite a bit of money doing that on my own. But then in addition to that, I also served and was very active in my grandfather's business, Pulte Homes, where I was on the board there. It's one of the largest home builders in the country. So I think I have a unique view that under President Trump's leadership, we can get some of this stuff done and get Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac turned around. And they do need to be turned around, and they're well on the way to being turned around, frankly.
Well, I mean, I think it's amazing the action that's been taken so far. You can read it in the headlines already. But I have to ask you this because I'm curious every time I see this happen, when someone like yourself comes in and starts making changes. What are the differences so far? I mean, because it's much easier in a sense, right, to go into a fully private operation and move around the deck chairs and make things more efficient. In the situation you're in, and anything that's related to the government in any way whatsoever, that's 10 times more difficult.
It's a great point. It's been a little bit disappointing, to be frank, because I genuinely wanted to work with a lot of Democrats on the other side of the aisle, and I still wanted to work with them.
Sure.
I view us all on the same aisle, frankly, because home ownership and housing affordability is very much there. But I understand that we live in partisan times and whatnot, but we're just focused again on restoring the American dream for all Americans. I think under President Trump's leadership, we'll be able to do that. And I kind of look at the politics as noise. So I'm just staying focused on how do we get mortgages, how do we get good mortgages written, how do we have low costs, and get people in as many homes as possible.
That makes sense. I mean, focus on the mission. And I have to say, I mean, I'd love your impression of it. A lot of the, there's not a ton, but a lot of the people who are squawking a little bit among the Democrats, there's a little bit of that. It seems more like unease more than anything else. Like this is not the same as it was before. And it's not clear to me where they'll all end up at the end of the day.
Yeah, I don't know. I just know that, I understand mortgages and housing, and we have a president, thankfully, who's a builder who understands mortgages and housing. And so that's going to be my focus. I'll leave the politics to CNN and Fox News and stuff like that. But we're laser focused on restoring the American dream, and that's what we're going to do.
There's nothing more important and nothing that represents the American dream like the homeowner. I think you should speak to that a little bit to us. I mean, this is at the center of, I think, a lot of President Trump's rhetoric over the years. His statesmanship has been about restoring the American dream, especially this time around. And I will say that I think a lot of people in the audience, especially if they're younger, they don't even know what that phrase means, right? The president has said this. It's absolutely true. And so how do you bring that back? There's so many younger people who have been in the audience for different media projects I've worked on over the years. It's astounding, who really don't even know what that phrase means, and they do not think that they despair of buying a home.
We have to bring back the American dream of home ownership. I'm very confident that we will. We have a better leader than, frankly, any other country in President Trump. We will get this done. It's just the last 4 years have been very tough for the housing market. To your point, it is a generational asset. It's where you get generational wealth from in many cases, is from a home. Owning a home is a illiquid security that is not easily disposed of, but that can create a lot of value over a long period of time. And so I think that under President Trump's leadership, we will see that the home will again become a vehicle of wealth, and that the country will be very prosperous as a result.
Well, that's it. That's the frontier. That's where we want to go. Nice. This has been great. I do want to one last question we have to ask. If I have you in the room, which is your Twitter game, very strong. People want to follow the director here. He's very good on social media. Talk to us a little bit about that, because you intend to continue to speak with people, directly from time to time.
Well, the president really innovated social media, and it's interesting because he's older, but he's still very young. And I think that you've had a lot of regulators, but maybe not people who are, in their late 30s or what have you. And so I think it's a real opportunity to communicate with people. And what we've seen, and I think you'll appreciate this, is to your point about fraud, is we put out some tips on fraud. I mean, we see so much information on fraud we can access and get from social media, and we've gotten some great tips. So I think that will continue, and I think social media could be, frankly, a way to, sounds kind of crazy, but it's very true, eventually bring down some of the cost of mortgages in terms of fraud, waste, and abuse. If we can get people reporting where they see fraud and making sure that the system is as tight and as secure as possible. And that's what we're laser focused on day in and day out.